A cold, rainy night in downtown Boston. A man in a worn jacket, holding his 6-year-old daughter asleep in his arms, stopped at a bus shelter. In the dark corner, a woman in business attire collapsed on the ground, her heel broken, clutching her stomach. He set his daughter down gently on the bench and ran over. "Are you okay?" "I was robbed. They took my bag, everything." He took off his jacket and wrapped it around her, shielding her from the rain. "I don't have much, but you need help more than I do." She looked up at him, her eyes trembling. "You don't know who I am?" "No, I just know you're cold." He had no idea that tomorrow, this woman would sit in the judge's chair and decide his fate. Ethan Ward, 35 years old, single father, factory worker, currently suing his former employer for wrongful termination, a man who had nothing left except his word and his daughter. Judge Amelia Cross, 38 years old, known throughout the Boston court system as the Iron Judge, someone who showed no mercy to rule breakers, someone who believed the law was black and white with no room for gray, someone who had built walls so high around her heart that even her own daughter rarely saw her smile. Lucy, 6 years old, Ethan's daughter, innocent and pure, always believing that good people will eventually be helped in return, always asking her father why he gave away his last dollar when they barely had enough to eat. Ethan used to be a mechanical engineer, someone with a future, someone with dreams. But after a workplace accident that shattered his left arm and left him with permanent nerve damage, he lost everything: his career, his insurance, his stability, and the company he had worked for turned their backs on him without a second thought. He took whatever jobs he could find, fixing appliances in people's basements, loading trucks at 3 in the morning, cleaning construction sites on weekends, anything to keep food on the table and a roof over Lucy's head, because losing his job was one thing, but losing his daughter's trust was something he would never survive. Then came the accusation. His former company claimed he had stolen equipment during his final week. A lie so blatant it made him sick, but without money for a lawyer and without witnesses willing to risk their own jobs, he was arrested, held in a cell for 2 days while Lucy cried at a neighbor's house. And even after they released him for lack of evidence, the damage was done, his name was ruined, his reputation destroyed, and no one would hire him. He decided to fight back, not because he thought he could win, but because he needed Lucy to know that her father didn't give up, that truth mattered even when the world said it didn't. So he filed the lawsuit himself, handwrote every document, spent nights in the library researching legal terms he barely understood, and prepared to face a courtroom alone against a corporation with unlimited resources. The night before the hearing, the rain was relentless. He was taking Lucy to stay with a friend because he couldn't afford to bring her to court, couldn't let her see him lose, and as they waited at the bus stop, he saw a woman collapsed in the shadows, her expensive suit soaked through, her face pale with shock, and without thinking, without knowing, without any expectation of reward, he did what his father had taught him to do. He helped. He carried her into the 24-hour convenience store, bought hot ginger tea with the last $10 in his wallet, wrapped a scarf around her neck that Lucy had made for him, and sat with her until the color returned to her face. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. He smiled softly. If we all helped each other, the world would be a warmer place. He left before she could ask his name, before she could see the holes in his shoes, before she could know that he had just given away the only money he had left. And as he walked back into the rain with Lucy on his shoulders, he had no idea that the woman he had just saved would hold his entire future in her hands the very next morning. A store clerk later said, "He left his last $10 and told me she needs it more than I do. I've never seen someone so poor be so rich in spirit." The next morning, Judge Amelia Cross walked into the courtroom with the same cold efficiency she always carried, her black robe pressed perfectly, her face a mask of professional distance. But something felt different today. Her hands were shaking slightly, her mind kept drifting back to the man who had helped her without asking for anything, without even asking her name, and she couldn't shake the feeling that kindness like that didn't exist in the world she knew. Her clerk handed her the docket. The last case on the schedule is a small one. Plaintiff Ethan Ward, versus Apex Manufacturing. Wrongful termination suit, plaintiff representing himself. Her heart stopped. The name echoed in her mind. And when the bailiff called the case and the man walked through the door, she knew immediately it was him, the man from the rain, the man who had given her his jacket, his tea, his kindness. And now he stood before her, not as a stranger, but as someone whose fate she would decide. He bowed his head respectfully. "Good morning, Your Honor." And his voice was the same gentle tone he had used the night before, calm and humble, carrying the weight of someone who had been knocked down too many times but still chose to stand. She cleared her throat, forcing herself back into the role of judge. "Mr. Ward, you are suing your former employer for wrongful termination. Is that correct?" "Yes, Your Honor. I just want them to tell the truth. I didn't steal anything. I just want my name cleared so my daughter doesn't grow up thinking her father's a thief." "Do you have legal representation?" "No, Your Honor. I only have my word and the belief that truth matters." She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw something she hadn't seen in years of judging cases: genuine honesty, not the rehearsed kind that lawyers coach their clients to perform, but the raw, unfiltered kind that came from a man who had nothing left to lose except his integrity. On the other side of the courtroom sat a team of 3 corporate attorneys in expensive suits, their briefcases polished, their expressions smug, and they looked at Ethan like he was an insect they were about to crush under their perfectly shined shoes. The lead attorney stood up, his voice dripping with condescension. "Your Honor, this is a frivolous lawsuit. Mr. Ward has no evidence, no witnesses, no credibility. He's wasting the court's time because he's bitter about losing his job due to his own incompetence." Ethan didn't flinch, didn't yell, didn't fight back with anger. He simply said, "I don't have evidence, that's true, but I have my conscience, and I know what I did and didn't do. And if that's not enough, then I accept whatever judgment comes, but I needed to try for my daughter so she knows her father fought for the truth." The courtroom fell completely silent. Even the stenographer stopped typing, and Judge Amelia felt something crack inside her chest, something she had sealed away years ago when she decided that emotions had no place in justice. After the session ended, she found him in the hallway, standing alone while the corporate lawyers laughed and slapped each other on the back, and she approached him quietly. "Mr. Ward, may I speak with you?" He turned, surprised. "Of course, Your Honor." She lowered her voice. "Why didn't you tell me last night that you were going to be in my courtroom?" He looked confused. "You were in pain. You needed help. What did my court case have to do with that? You weren't afraid I would think you were trying to manipulate me? I was more afraid you would think I only helped you because of the case, and that would have made everything I did meaningless." She stood there speechless, because in 20 years of practicing law and 10 years of being a judge, she had never met anyone who thought like that. Someone who helped because it was right, not because it was strategic. And for the first time since she put on the black robe, she questioned whether she had been measuring justice by the wrong scale. A court reporter later said, "After that session, the judge, who was famous for being ice cold, sat alone in her chambers for hours. A colleague said they heard her crying." The second hearing came 3 days later, and this time the corporate attorneys brought even more ammunition, fabricated witness statements, doctored timesheets, anything to bury Ethan under a mountain of lies, and they presented it all with theatrical confidence, as if they had already won. Ethan stood there with nothing but a folder of handwritten notes, his voice shaking but his eyes steady. "I know I can't match their resources. I know I look like I don't belong here. But I did the right thing at that company. I saved a coworker from being electrocuted. I reported safety violations. And they fired me because I made them look bad. And if standing here alone with nothing but the truth makes me look foolish, then I accept that, because being honest is worth more than winning." Judge Amelia listened, her jaw tight, her heart pounding. And then she did something that shocked everyone in the room. She turned to the defense attorneys and said, "I want to see the security footage from the day of the accident that led to Mr. Ward's injury." The lead attorney's face went pale. "Your Honor, that footage was We were told it was destroyed due to server malfunctions. She leaned forward, her voice cold as steel. I find that highly suspicious. I am issuing a court order for the company to produce all archived footage from that month. And if it has been destroyed, I want documented proof of when and why. And if I find out it was destroyed to hide evidence, there will be severe consequences. The attorneys scrambled, whispered urgently to each other, and 2 days later they returned to court looking defeated. They had found the footage in a backup server they claimed didn't exist. And when it played on the screen, the entire courtroom gasped. Because there was Ethan, rushing toward a co-worker who was about to touch a live electrical panel, pushing him out of the way, taking the shock himself, his body convulsing as he saved another man's life. And then, in the corner of the frame, 3 supervisors standing there watching, doing nothing. And one of them was the same person who later accused Ethan of theft. Judge Amelia's voice cut through the silence like a blade. This case is not only about wrongful termination, it's about a company that endangered its workers, retaliated against someone who exposed their negligence, and then tried to destroy his reputation to cover their own liability. I am ruling in favor of the plaintiff. Apex Manufacturing will pay full back wages, medical expenses, punitive damages, and a formal public apology. Ethan collapsed into his chair, tears streaming down his face. Not because of the money, but because someone finally believed him, someone finally saw the truth. And in that moment, every sleepless night, every moment of doubt, every time he wanted to give up but kept going for Lucy, all of it was validated, all of it mattered. The corporate attorneys gathered their papers in silence, their faces red with embarrassment and anger. And as they left the courtroom, one of them muttered under his breath that the judge had been biased, but she heard it, and she turned to him with eyes like steel and said, "The only bias I have is toward the truth. And if you have a problem with that, you can file an appeal. But I promise you, every judge in this district will see that footage and come to the same conclusion I did." After the courtroom cleared, Judge Amelia found him sitting on the steps outside, the rain falling again just like it had the night they first met, and she sat down beside him without her robe, just a woman in a simple dress, her professional armor stripped away. "I owe you more than a ruling," she said quietly, her voice barely audible over the sound of rain hitting the concrete. He looked at her, confused, wiping tears from his face. "You gave me justice. That's more than I ever expected. That's more than anyone has given me in years." She shook her head slowly. "No, I owe you for something that happened 7 years ago. Something I've never forgotten. Something that changed my entire life." He waited, not understanding, his mind still reeling from the verdict, from the weight of finally being believed. "My daughter Emma, she got stuck in a hospital elevator when she was only 5 years old. The power went out during a storm, the alarm system was broken, and she was trapped in the dark for over an hour, screaming, terrified, clawing at the doors. And I was in the hallway losing my mind because I couldn't get to her. Security said they were working on it, but it was taking too long, and I could hear her screaming for me through the metal doors." Ethan's eyes widened, the memory flooding back like a wave. "I remember that day. I was visiting someone on the same floor, a friend who had surgery, and I heard a kid crying. Not just crying, but screaming in terror, and everyone was just standing around waiting for maintenance." She nodded, tears streaming down her face now. "You didn't wait. You ran to a maintenance closet, you grabbed a crowbar, you forced those doors open with your bare hands. I watched your fingers bleed as you pried the metal apart. And when you finally got her out, she was shaking so badly she couldn't stand. And you just held her. You wrapped your jacket around her and told her she was safe. You told her she was brave. And then before I could even process what had happened, before I could ask your name or thank you properly, you were gone. You just disappeared into the crowd like you were afraid of being thanked." He was silent, stunned, the pieces clicking together in his mind. "You're that mother, the one who was crying in the hallway, the one who kept saying thank you over and over. Yes, and last night, you saved me again. You gave me your jacket, your tea, your kindness, and you asked for nothing in return. And today, I finally got to return the favor." Not because you asked me to, not because you manipulated the situation, but because the universe gave me this one chance, this one impossible chance to repay the man who gave me back my daughter, the man who taught me that strangers can be angels. They sat there in the rain, two people who had saved each other without knowing it, connected by threads of kindness that had woven through 7 years of life, through pain and loss and struggle. And for the first time in her career, Judge Amelia Cross understood that justice wasn't just about the law. It wasn't just about rules and precedents and legal arguments. It was about recognizing the humanity in every person who stood before her. It was about remembering that behind every case was a human being with a story, with pain, with hope, and that sometimes the most just thing she could do was simply see them, really see them, the way Ethan had seen her in the rain. A courthouse security guard later said, "When they stood outside in the rain, the judge took off her black robe and draped it over his shoulders. I've never seen two people look at each other like that, quiet but full of gratitude, like they were saying thank you for saving my life without saying a single word." Several months passed, and Ethan found a new job as a mechanical engineer at a company that valued safety and integrity. He moved into a better apartment, bought Lucy new clothes, and for the first time in years, he could breathe without the weight of desperation crushing his chest. Judge Amelia continued her work on the bench, but something had shifted inside her. She no longer saw defendants as just case numbers. She started asking questions that went beyond the legal arguments. She wanted to understand the people behind the crimes, the circumstances that led them there, the chances they deserved or didn't deserve. One Saturday afternoon, she took her daughter Emma to the park near their home. And as they walked past the playground, she saw a familiar figure teaching a little girl how to ride a bike. It was Ethan, running beside Lucy, holding the seat steady, laughing when she wobbled, cheering when she found her balance. Amelia stopped, her heart warming, and Emma tugged her hand. "Mom, isn't that the man from the elevator?" She nodded. "Yes, sweetheart, that's him." They walked over slowly, and when Ethan saw them, his face lit up. "Judge Cross? What a surprise." She smiled. "I didn't know you lived in this neighborhood." He gestured around. "I moved here a few weeks ago, wanted to be closer to Lucy's school, fresh start and all that." Lucy rode up on her bike, breathing hard, her face glowing with pride. "Dad, I did it. I didn't fall once." Emma clapped. "That's so cool. Can you teach me?" And just like that, the two girls were off together, racing around the path while their parents sat on a bench watching. Amelia spoke first. "I've been thinking about what you said in court, about how honesty is worth more than winning, and I realize I've spent my whole career measuring success by verdicts and precedents, but I forgot to measure it by whether people left my courtroom feeling like they were seen as human beings." Ethan nodded thoughtfully. "I think the legal system needs people like you, people who care about getting it right. But I also think the system breaks people down until they forget why they started caring in the first place." She laughed softly, a sound she hadn't made in years. "You're probably right. I became a judge because I wanted to protect people. But somewhere along the way, I started protecting the law more than the people it was meant to serve." He looked at her, his expression gentle. "But you protected me, and that means you didn't lose yourself completely. You just needed a reminder." She felt tears sting her eyes. "Thank you for being that reminder, for showing me that kindness still exists even when the world tries to beat it out of people." They sat in comfortable silence watching their daughters play, and for the first time in a long time, both of them felt like they weren't carrying the weight of the world alone. As the sun began to set, casting golden light across the park, Lucy and Emma ran back, breathless and happy, and Lucy said, "Dad, can Miss Emma and her mom come have dinner with us?" Ethan looked at Amelia, raising an eyebrow. "What do you think, Your Honor? Do you accept the invitation?" She smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. "I accept, but only if you stop calling me Your Honor when we're not in court." "Deal," he said, and they walked together toward his apartment, two families that had been broken in different ways, now finding something whole in each other's company. "From today, I choose to look at people a little longer, to see them not as roles but as souls, to remember that kindness is the only currency that never loses value." I will live with kindness. 1 year later, Ethan opened a small repair shop called Honest Hands, a place where he fixed appliances and machines for people in the neighborhood, charging fair prices and never turning away anyone who couldn't afford to pay. His reputation grew not because he advertised, but because people talked. They said there was a man in town who did things the right way, who treated customers like family, who proved that integrity could still build a successful business. Judge Amelia visited often, sometimes bringing Emma to play with Lucy in the back room, sometimes just stopping by for coffee and conversation. And the people in the neighborhood started to notice. They whispered that the famously stern judge had a softer side, that she smiled more, that she seemed lighter. And some said it was because of the man who had taught her that justice without compassion was just cruelty in a black robe. One afternoon, as Amelia sat in the shop watching Ethan work on an old washing machine, she said, "You know what people are calling you now?" He looked up, grease on his hands. "What's that?" "The man who changed the judge," she said with a grin. He laughed. "That's ridiculous. You changed yourself. I just reminded you who you already were." She shook her head. "No, you did more than that. You showed me that the people I judge every day are not their worst moments. They're human beings who made mistakes or got knocked down or never had a fair shot to begin with. And now I look at every case differently. I ask myself, what would Ethan do if he were in their shoes?" He wiped his hands on a rag. "I'm not sure I'm the best role model. I've made plenty of mistakes." "But you never stopped being kind," she said softly. "Even when the world gave you every reason to become bitter, you chose kindness, and that's the hardest thing a person can do." Lucy and Emma ran in from the back room, holding 2 mugs of hot chocolate they had made themselves. "We made drinks for you," they announced proudly. Ethan and Amelia each took a mug, the warmth spreading through their hands, and as they sat there together, surrounded by the hum of machines and the laughter of their daughters, both of them understood that they had found something rare. Not romance, not obligation, but a deep, unshakable friendship built on mutual respect and shared belief that goodness still mattered. A few weeks later, a newspaper ran a feature story about Judge Amelia Cross. The headline read, "The Iron Judge Who Found Her Heart," and the article detailed how she had started a new initiative called Justice with Compassion, a program that connected defendants with resources like job training, mental health services, and community support instead of just sending them to jail. And when asked what inspired the change, she said, "I met a man who reminded me that the law should serve people, not punish them for being human." Ethan read the article while fixing a toaster, and he smiled, proud of her, proud that their chance meeting in the rain had rippled out into something bigger than both of them. That evening, both families gathered at the park where they had first reconnected. And as the sun set and the sky turned shades of pink and orange, Lucy looked up at her father and said, "Dad, do you think good things happen to good people?" Ethan knelt down. "I think good people make good things happen, even when it's hard, even when no one is watching, and eventually the world notices." Emma chimed in, "My mom says you're the best person she knows." He glanced at Amelia, who was smiling softly, and he said, "Your mom is the one who gave me a second chance when I needed it most, so I think she's the best person I know." The 2 girls hugged their parents, and in that moment, surrounded by the people they loved, Ethan and Amelia both realized that they hadn't just survived their struggles, they had transformed them into something beautiful, a friendship that proved kindness was never wasted, that helping a stranger in the rain could change the course of 2 lives, and that justice, real justice, was about seeing people not as they appeared, but as they truly were. If you believe stories like this deserve to be told, leave a comment and subscribe. We tell the stories that shouldn't be forgotten, because sometimes the people we overlook are the ones who save us.